Good friend and the author today, Kannan. Friends, book lovers, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. Or as we say in Kerala, ellavarikkum ende vinithamaya namaskaram. It's wonderful to be here in Chennai. I'm afraid it's a very short visit. I came this afternoon just for this event and I'm leaving tomorrow morning, but it's a warm city in every sense, literally as well as figuratively, and I know that Chennaites are not only large-hearted and high-minded, but also keen connoisseurs of good writing, literature and the arts. I've rarely seen such a large crowd for a book release, and I'm sure that's a tribute both to the subject of the book, the quality of the author, and indeed to your own interests in words, writing and good books. Secondly, I'm proud to say that I too am connected to Tamil Nadu, not just by being from Palakkad originally, which of course, as you know, is a sort of remnant of the Madras presidency tucked into Kerala, but also because my mother lived in Coimbatore for 15 years and I was a regular visitor when she was there before she moved back to Kerala. But most important, I'm delighted because, of course, the occasion today marks a centenary of the birth of MGR back in 1917. He was originally from my native Kerala. His family comes from the same district, Palakkad. But in many ways, I think he was more Tamil than the Tamils themselves. Still, he was seen very much as a local hero by all of us Palakkadans. On my childhood visits to village cinemas in rural Kerala with my cousins and uncles and so on, I became a huge fan of MGR in my own childhood, and the only Tamil I knew then were MGR dialogues that I could actually rattle off with some modest comprehension. Unfortunately, I've lost that talent today, or it might be more useful in Indian politics that I only remembered all of those wonderful lines. But anyway, nothing could be more befitting than chronicling the life of this actor-politician who walked the earth like God, but to do so for posterity in an objective manner, which is what Kannan has tried to do. And I'm really pleased that Kannan is the one, especially as Kamini said, after his very good biography of Anna, which I had the great pleasure of launching here 7 years ago. I want to commend Penguin for commissioning him to do this, to take on this particularly interesting subject. Now, MGR was, of course, the first Indian superstar to conquer the political realm. He was a third-class dropout, but he was a rare, if raw, genius. And he was a genie also because he, like the legendary genies who came out of bottles, he could conjure, in his case, lakhs of people at his will, and make people like my good friend Mr. Tirunavakarasar and the senior leader here, Mr. R&V, take him as their leader. So, for that reason, he was not just a genius, but also a genie. And I heard Mr. Tirunavakarasar saying once famously that MGR was the one and the rest were zeros who gained value because of their association with the one. And perhaps, certainly for many decades, the only one. 30 years after his death, the national parties, including my own Congress, are finding it difficult to make a real comeback in Tamil Nadu because MGR's independent political emergence snuffed out in many ways all our hopes at that time for Congress as the alternative to the DMK. MGR's first lasting impact on Tamil Nadu politics was to change it from a contest between a Dravidian party and a national party between the DMK and the Congress to one principally between two Dravidian parties. In fact, in 1971, the Congress under our late great leader Kamaraj was expected to return to power. All the political pundits were expecting that. But the DMK was, as you know, voted back to power with a crushing majority, and MGR's campaign, as Kannan records in some detail, played no small part in it. If MGR was a force that the nationalist forces could not overcome when he was in the DMK, he grew even more formidable after he broke company with his parent party and set up his own party, because then he was indeed the ADMK in the eyes of the public. What was remarkable was that the man whom so many thought would not last the rough and tumble of Indian politics and public life showed his grit, his stamina, his determination, and his thick skin to overcome the very many challenges and indignities of a political career. Frankly, it's an inspiring story. People like me who have come into politics from a different world and have also had to suffer some of these same challenges can only admire him for the way in which he faced up to them and overcame them. Yes, there were compromises and setbacks, which Kannan chronicles with commendable candor, but he still made history, MGR. And the irony is, and I suspect that Mr. Tirunavakarasar will agree with me, that in his heart of hearts, MGR was a congressman. He had a puja room, which I don't think DMK members were supposed to have. The puja room sported a portrait of Gandhi, along with the gods and his mother's image, and one of his heroes was Netaji Bose. But he certainly succumbed to the Dravidian movement's appeal and the charm of the DMK patriarch, Kalaignar Karunanidhi, and he threw in his lot with the DMK early on in the early 50s. It was a calculated risk at that time, because obviously the Congress was the ruling party and DMK was a very fledgling movement, but it paid off. In 1967, the DMK was voted to power for the first time, and the posters of an MGR shot by M.R. Radha and sitting in his hospital bed, appealing for votes, played a very big role. In fact, there's a very interesting, RMB was pointing out to me that in this book, there is a very rare photograph of MGR injured with a bandage around his neck at that time in '67. And it's a very famous photograph. I was a child, but I remember seeing it at that time, but it hasn't appeared very widely. So the photos in the book are also very, very important. The chief minister designate of the DMK in '67, Annadure, was so impressed by MGR's appeal to the public that he actually sent a list of his cabinet nominees to MGR for his comments and approval. That was something I didn't know until I read Kannan's book. When Anna passed away in '69, just a couple of years later, MGR played the kingmaker, and he repaid his debt handsomely to Kalaignar by helping him to become the chief minister. Now, MGR's charisma and popularity were unparalleled. No other actor, except NTR, of course, in Andhra Pradesh, the then undivided Andhra, could emulate his success. But NTR, as we know, lived to see a difficult political ending, whereas till the end, MGR stayed at the top and was helped very much by Providence. MGR's own life of poverty and struggle, his careful image building, the conversion of his mass appeal into votes, is singular in electoral politics and public affairs. In this richly detailed account of MGR's life, Kannan weaves a riveting story of the harsh early years, stage life. In fact, it is described by Kannan that MGR was not particularly interested in acting or the theatre. He was forced to join this theatre group just to make a living and to give some support to his mother, who could not afford to feed him. That was after his father's death. A once affluent family was reduced to such poverty that MGR dropped out of school after the 3rd standard and became an actor, not out of love of acting, but because of poverty. And he never forgot that. It's a very important story, I believe. then his belated stardom, his genius in figuring out that the real and the real could be morphed into each other. One thing that was striking was MGR was the person he portrayed, and the voters believed it. They saw him as the authentic common man, the common man hero, who would overcome all adversities for them, just as he did in the movies in which he acted. And certainly as a child, when I used to see those MGR movies, that's the way he came across. And he made sure that he only played parts that fitted in with that image. When he eventually went into politics and public life, it wasn't that much of a leap of the imagination. NTR was playing mythical heroes from the epics and the Puranas and so on, whereas MGR was actually playing today's people as heroes, and the voters identified with that. From the mid-50s, when his hero status had become secure, an involuntary group of image makers, scriptwriters, lyricists, and so on spun extra stories of his fight for justice, his invincibility, his acts of kindness towards the poor. This morphed the real and the real, because he was socially conscious, he was politically committed as none other, but as Kannan shows, some of the stories were imaginary and some were true. He sometimes genuinely gave a lot of charity out of kindness, and sometimes other stories were also written for him. But anyway, by 62 already, MGR and the DMK had become interchangeable in the popular imagination. And when he charted an independent political course in 72, then of course his own party was him. Kannan is also described as difficult and intense relationship with his protege Jayalalitha, his own 10-year rule as chief minister, and has analyzed his legacy. As I said in my blurb for the book, it is in many ways the very story of Tamilagam. Administers literally crores of rupees in trying to get midday meals into the bellies of very often very, very poor children, on the sound principle that a hungry child cannot learn, cannot grow. And we must congratulate MGR for that lasting contribution to India's life. Whenever his political stock appeared low, Providence helped draw support and sympathy to him. There were some scandals, I think, that dogged his years in power. Kannan is very frank about that. Some people, like Kannan himself, who is a child of the Dravidian movement, would feel that he slightly undermined the Dravidian image or the Dravidian ideal by his temple visits and his own ostentatious religiosity. But his image as a clean man personally and as an authentic Dravidian hero could not be dented. I think the book is an excellent sequel to Kannan's earlier work on Anna, which I launched 7 years ago in Chennai in the presence of Ram and some of the others who are present here today. And I think that it's important that books like the Anna book and now the MGR book help to balance this great lacuna in Indian history, including our contemporary political history, which is mostly focused on the North. There have been very few nationally read books in the English language about Southern political leaders. I would argue there still is no great book on Kamaraj. I hope Kannan can consider that. There certainly will one day need to be a good book on Karunanidhi, Kalanya. There's a lot that still needs to be written about the stalwarts of the South, whereas biographies of northern leaders and accounts of history from a northern perspective are widely available. Leaders from the non-Hindi heartland, even if they are icons or colossuses, tend very often to be marginalized or forgotten in the national narrative. And I think it's important that this work by Kannan, which is not just a sort of subaltern history as some would suggest, makes an important contribution in opening the doors to non-Tamil readers, not just in India but around the world, to gain insights into the fascinating history and growth of the Dravidian movement, its successful exploitation of the medium of cinema, language, polemics, and of course the assertion of self-identity, which we see all over the nation today. This is not a political forum, so I'm not going to be overtly political, but you do know that there is a very strong sentiment unleashed in recent years of people trying to promote a vision of India that reduces this large and diverse country to a Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, which it is not and can never be. And the life of MGR reminds us how important it was to have that cultural self-assertion coming out of the people of Tamil Nadu. Let me stop saying anything about MGR in the book. We have many more speakers to say, but let me say something that I am perhaps more qualified to talk about, and that is a little bit about the author himself. Kannan went a few years after me to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, though he won the same scholarship that I had won when I went there. And when I was working at the United Nations, I got this wonderful letter telling me about this young man who was following in many ways in my footsteps in Fletcher, and was also interested in an international career at the United Nations. This is, I think, 1992, so we go back an entire generation. There was, I think, a genuine interest in public service, and particularly at that stage of his life in international public service. I was working closely with Kofi Annan in those days, a special assistant to Kofi Annan, not as Secretary General yet, but as Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping, and peacekeeping was at its peak, so we were able to get Kannan into the United Nations and the peacekeeping side of things in February of '93. That was the beginning of what has been a very interesting career. He did take a break from it. I think after 2.5 years in the UN, he quit to try and enter Tamil politics in '95, '96. Chief Minister Kadanyar invited him to serve as a special editor of Murasoli, the DMK party organ, and I think he only did it for a month or so because public affairs requires a certain amount of patronage from the party leadership and a certain amount of acceptability to the cadres, and that I think Kannan was capable of developing, but it also requires the luxury of being able to wait, especially if you're a relatively young man, as he was at that time, until your time comes. And those who have, I think he had just started a family, he had just come into that stage of life where you have responsibilities, and those from a middle-income background with family responsibility cannot always afford to take the risk of devoting a long time with no income until you can establish your credentials and get into public office. And so he asked me whether he could come back to the UN, and I'm very glad to say, as he graciously mentioned, that I was able to rope him back in a second time. Those were the days when the UN was still expanding. Today it would be a very difficult chance if someone made a decision like that today. But I always knew that the fire in him for a public career had not disappeared. It was just, as the expression is today, had just been put on the back burner, and that he was going to eventually do what I had done and come back to try and make a difference at home in this country. Last year he took some time off during the state's general elections. He was on the other side from Tirunavakarasar and me. We were campaigning for the Congress. He was the second lead spokesperson of the DMK. But even though we were on the opposite sides, I was very happy for him and for the DMK. I even wrote to him saying that I hoped he would be the DMK's Derek O'Brien, and that should happen sooner rather than later. But of course, I was careful not to tell him to be the DMK's Shashi Tharoor. But honestly, I think he would be a great asset to Mr. Stalin's leadership. He would be an excellent representative of the DMK in a place like Delhi, where, as you know, wonderful mellifluous Tamil doesn't go very far. You do need to be able to communicate well in English or Hindi, and to be able to appeal to a national audience, and the DMK could benefit, I think, from having someone like Kannan joining his illustrious colleagues in Delhi in any capacity, with his quarter century now of experience at the international level, at the UN, his own competence, his organizational ability, as we can see with all of you present here, his people skills. I think he's now well prepared for a larger role, and that I would encourage him to leave Basra and Iraq behind. They have their own problems, but let the Iraqis deal with them now. Come back to Tamil Nadu, come back to India, and take up a public career in full earnest. And if the DMK can't utilize his services, I think Tirunavakara sir and I will talk about whether we have alternatives to offer in the rising new Congress party of Tamil Nadu. But let me tell Kannan that whatever he does in public life, he must not stop writing. Kannan, this is for you. Kannan, I'm giving you some advice. Whatever you do in public life, and you must do it, you must not give up your writing. I think that with Kamini sitting here, I do congratulate Penguin for having commissioned him to do this. I think that we should get him now to do some more books. He can do it in addition to being a politician. I can show him how. Just sleep very minimally and you'll be able to do it. Maybe working on Kalanya's key messages, speeches and writings, maybe a history of the Dravidian movement, borrowing from what he wrote about Anna and Karunanidhi, maybe a book on Kamaraj, maybe a travelogue on Tamil Nadu, or a sociological account of Tamil Nadu today and tomorrow, maybe a study of the welfare politics of Tamil Nadu and the implications for the rest of the country. Lots of things he could do justice to, and I would encourage Penguin to not let go of him yet. And certainly, fond though I am of the UN, I should say to Kannan that, like me, one day he should say, been there, done that. Come back and contribute now to our homeland. With that, let me say how very pleased I was to release this fine biography. I want to congratulate Kannan once again on writing MGR A Life, and I wish the book all success in keeping alive the name of that great Tamil hero who was still also a Malayali. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.